friends, I'm Liz.
I'm Robbie. Welcome back to our channel, Bookworm Couple. We are going to do something a little bit different today.
Yeah.
It has been vaguely a year since we started this
Early
channel.
October
I
last
don't remember the exact date.
I think it was October 4th.
We definitely missed it a little bit.
We did, but whatever.
We wanted to do just something a little bit different, talk about our history as readers. So we're going to talk about some of the books and series that made us as readers, that are the most important to us fundamentally.
Honestly,
from when we were kids till
person.
now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of reading. And that's why we love it so
Yeah.
much. We are going to make it up. So I think we're each going to do 5 books or series that were very meaningful to us, either as young readers or as adults. I think mine is mostly young from when I was
Mine's
quite
like
young,
pretty medium.
which makes sense. But yeah, so let's go ahead and jump on in. You want to?
Okay.
Ladies first?
All right, the first one for me is Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. Most of mine are very unserious, I will say, because that's the kind of reader I am.
Sure, yeah.
But I was beyond obsessed with this series. I believe it was 3 books in total, and then eventually there was another book where they all grew up, and I read it in my adulthood, and it's really depressing.
Is that the one that the movie's based on?
No, the movie's based on the original.
Oh, okay.
There's 2 or 3, I can't remember. I think there might just be 2, and then the third one is the one where they grow up. And because the books grew with me, I was also having this kind of tragic journey into adulthood with them. Anyways, that's not what we're talking about. But this was one of the first books that I remember I couldn't stop thinking about. I felt like I saw myself in each of these characters. It's, if you don't know this series, it's a book about a group of 4 best friends who have been I believe their birthdays are all within like a week of each other.
Oh, cool.
So all of their moms meet in like prenatal yoga class and become friends. And then because their due dates are all very similar, their daughters also become friends. And this first book is really the first time they're going to be apart during a summer, because I believe they're approaching their end of their high school days, and so some of them are going on a family trip, the other ones are going to soccer camp, all the things. And so at beginning of this summer, they find this pair of pants that magically fits all of them, who are all different body types, heights, weights, everything, but somehow this pair of pants fits all 4 of them perfectly. And so they end up sending the pair of pants throughout the summer to each of them, so as kind of like a postcard. And what I always loved so much about it is there was always something on the pants that like had to do with what happened.
Like a patch.
Like
or
a
something?
patch,
Oh, okay.
or like somebody drew something, or there was like a stain, that they made really pretty because it was like, I fell during this, da da da. So it was it's a beautiful story of 4 different young women discovering who they are going into adulthood. And while there was one character that I very much idolized, I saw myself in every single one of the girls. And I think now, growing older, watching the movies, and I have the books with me too, I see more and more of myself in each of their stories, which is, I think it's such an important thing for young women to not feel alone. And I mean, anyone really, but for me, this was so important because you got really messy. And this was me in my young teen years reading this, realizing it was okay to get really messy and to not know who you are and to go against the grain and do what you want to do and stop caring so much what people think. And they were such a support system for me growing up as a young person. And this very much changed the desire that I had when reading of what I was looking for, which I think very much turned me into the reader that I am now, looking for those books that allow me to kind of heal internally, but also give me a support system of characters. And I think that's such a beautiful thing that books can do, give you a shoulder to cry on and a group of friends that are there for you on the pages.
Yeah.
Anywho,
absolutely.
That was a long monologue
That's
about
beautiful.
Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants.
Hey, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. I mean, I've heard of it, which means it must be pretty popular because
I'm sure your sister read it.
I'm
honestly.
sure my sister read it.
Yeah.
I do believe that we owned those.
It also had a big era. There was a very big era.
For sure. I will also say I didn't even think about any books that were not fantasy when I made this list.
So funny.
But I think that says more about me and my tastes as a reader.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Which is the point of this video
when I was
anyway.
making this list, I was kind of laughing at myself. Well, first of all, it's literally all over the place. But like I said, so many of them are like it's not like I'm citing Moby Dick. You know, I'm like,
yeah.
these are books that emotionally affected me as a reader and as a person.
I think there's only like
you know
one
what I
or
mean?
two. Yeah, I mean, like most of mine are not like the best series ever written.
But I think that's the whole point.
Some of them are, some of them aren't. I don't know.
Hey, that's your opinion.
It's
you know
an
what
opinion
I mean?
thing, I guess. Yeah.
Anywho,
love that. Sisterhood
what's
of
yours?
So my first one I'm going to talk about is his Dark Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman. This is I guess, YA book series. I think that's what it was billed as. I mean, I managed to find it in I think my elementary school library.
Dang.
So I think it's technically supposed to be for kids. It is also focused on a young child. Her name is Lyra, a young woman going through from childhood to young adulthood, really, which is a major overarching theme for the book as well as for many books. These books are very important to me and were very formative to me as a reader because they were some of the first ones that I found on my own. I don't think anyone pointed these to me. I think I just kind of saw them in the library and picked them out. So this is probably I judged books by books by their cover all the time, even now.
Well, absolutely.
But I really did when I was younger. And you totally can. Like you can tell the art 100%. Style. You're like, yeah, this is. Well,
you also have joked about like the title form, the title equation.
Something of something and something. And I'm like, okay, sure. I know what this book is going to be.
Very similar to ACOTAR.
Probably not going to be my personal favorite.
For your wife.
But it's also not like, you know what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Anyway.
For sure.
Back to his Dark Materials trilogy. It follows Lyra, and in this world, without really talking about anything for anyone who hasn't heard of the series, there are physical personifications of essentially your spirit called daemons, and they are little animals. Oh. And it's just a fascinating world because it's, other than that, it's pretty close to our actual real world. And there are differences. One of the major ones and one of the major themes in this series is religion. And as like a 5th grader or 6th grader, when I first picked this up, most of that went entirely over my head, which was a fun time reading it again, like in high school, and being like, oh, whoa.
Oh, we're getting serious.
Yes, exactly. But the thing that attached me so much to this world is, I mean, the characters are brilliant, and it is, I guess, billed as a YA series, but it's not written that way. It's written in a way that respects the intelligence of the reader, and for someone who was, 10 or 11 when he picked this up, that felt really good.
Yeah.
And I could tell when I was reading it that I was missing a lot. Basically, all of the, really overt religious, anti-religious themes, really. Yeah. But I could tell that something was there that I wasn't getting, because so much was happening, and I just really didn't understand, I was like, there was something here that I'm missing. And that was huge for me. That was exciting for me, because it's just like, there's this whole world out there, and there's so much information that I can take, and I can't even scratch the surface of it yet. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
And it's such like a magical thing about reading. I'm being spoken to by the author as if I'm an adult. I'm reading something that I can't grasp yet because my brain hasn't encountered it before. You're learning actively in the moment, and it was really exciting, and it really opened up the world for me. And because I kind of found it on my own, and it felt very like it was mine. It felt very personal to me, and before that in my life, I had really been reading the same things over and over again, and it kind of just opened the door for me to be like, there are other things out here. Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because I kind of had the same experience as a young reader of being like, not like I have a secret, but like, you don't even know. Yeah. You don't even know. You're living in this world. You think that you know all the stuff, and my world is so much more
fun. Especially as a kid, being I have this amazing. You don't even know anything about this. This is so cool. How are you not happy all the time? Even though a lot of the book is set in Oxford, England, just an alternate version of Oxford, England.
Cool.
But as a kid who grew up on Long Island, I was like, whoa, Oxford, so cool. Which Oxford is cool. But anyway, so that's, I mean, it's quite a well-known series, and I do know that he has written more books. I think like a sequel series or maybe a prequel series. I have not read it. I plan to. It's on my TBR. I will get there eventually. There are certain ones on this list that I will probably not ever read again. I really want to reread this series. I don't think I've read it since like my senior or junior year in high school, and so I'd just love to revisit it. There have been multiple adaptations of it. There is a not very good movie starring Daniel Craig,
I remember.
But there was
I think I
an
started
actually
watching it,
quite good HBO
the
series
show.
that starts off kind of like a little wonky, but by the end I was like, wow, this is actually quite good. I really did enjoy it by the end. So if you have read it or if you're just interested in seeing what the world is like, I highly recommend checking out the series on Max because I actually quite liked it.
Yeah.
And I wish it had gotten a little bit more buzz. Starring Daphne Keane as Lyra. You'd probably know her from Logan. What's your next one?
So my next one is kind of a style of writing and an author. There's not one particular series.
Okay.
Because, well, I will say, so my next one is Nora Roberts.
Oh, just
Basically,
Nora
period.
Roberts.
Well, the series that got me into it, because she writes a lot of trilogies. That's like her thing. It's like, if you ever look up Nora Roberts, if you've never read Nora Roberts, they're usually trilogies. She has a lot of one-off books as well, but she writes a ton of like 3-book series over and over and over and over again. It's very similar formula every time. The Cousins O'Dwyer trilogy was the first one that really got
O'Dwyer.
me. Yes.
Oh, baby.
We
Irish?
love an Irish.
Sure, great.
Half, I would say probably 80% of her books are set in Ireland. I don't know.
Oh.
I feel like I've read a lot of her books, but I probably only scratched the surface because she's written maybe thousands of books. I don't even know. So many books. The Cousins O'Dwyer trilogy was the first one that really got me into Nora Roberts, but kind of what I'm saying is it's more of the author / style because it was the first romance I'd ever read with some sexual scenes on the page written out. And that was the first time I'd ever really experienced anything like that and changed my life because I sure loved it. And it's funny how far I've grown as a reader because when I first read these, not that I felt like they were the greatest written ever, but now having read so many of them and the genre in general having expanded, I can kind of see going back to Nora Roberts is a little bit slow for me now.
Sure.
Because the formula of her books are almost always the same, and specifically the sex scenes are basically almost always the same. But
I noticed
phenomenal.
that in like my third, and not even by the same author, like my third romantic book, I went, okay, so these all kind of shake out the same way. Huh?
Well, specifically, and we don't need to go into this, but I think it's funny. I don't know if you've read a lot of sexy books. Each author tends to kind of have an equation.
Yeah, sure.
Of like, and maybe this is what gets them to orgasm. Maybe this is how they have sex, whatever it is. But like each author there's pretty much, and I've read a lot of very sexy books.
They do say write what you know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, which is kind of fun. I will say that these books, Nora Roberts' equation didn't necessarily feel like the most realistic equation to me as far as pleasure, but we got really sexy. We were there. We were in it. It's you're a part of it. There's talk about she loves a slow burn. She loves an enemies to lovers.
Oh, yeah.
They're all very.
So she loves the tropes.
She loves the tropes,
yeah,
and I will say this particular series, Cousins O'Dwyer, was probably the first romantasy that I'd ever read. Yes, it was romance, but it was also set in a fantasy setting, and I don't think Nora Roberts gets enough credit for how good of a fantasy writer she is. There's another series that she wrote, a trilogy, it's Chronicles of the One, possibly? I read it at the beginning of the pandemic, one of my favorites of hers ever to this day. I think probably one of her best written as far as like the story content of it. It starts with a pandemic, which I started it in early 2020, not knowing that. But a pandemic in which the people who survive are either magical or non-magical. Fantastic book. Anywho, I could go on and on and on. But for me, these books are really important to me. This author is really important to me, and this type of writing is very important to me because it was kind of the first time I allowed myself to escape into that I really liked. As far as being a romance reader, I felt a lot of, and I'm sure if you've watched the channel, you probably have heard, I do kind of feel a lot of embarrassment around the type of reader that I am because I always felt like I wasn't smart for not desiring to read the most dense literature. Yeah. And so the first time I started reading these and allowed myself to be like, this is what I like, and it makes me feel so good, and it's so fun to read, and I have such a good time. So that was such a like kind of release for me, literally.
For sure. No. Okay. Very good.
Anywho, yes, if you want Nora Roberts trilogy recommendations, let me know because I've read anything that she's written that has been fantasy, I've probably read. So.
Oh, does she write non-fantasy too?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She just writes straight up romance.
Just writes.
Any romance novel has some sort of drama to it, but not all of hers are fantasy.
Got it.
Okay, Robbie, what's
Perfect.
yours?
So my next one is going to be the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I read a ton when I was a kid. We'll get into it a little bit more later in this list, but I kind of stopped probably in college. I just stopped reading as much, and that kind of continued into my mid 20s, maybe even
Yeah.
late 20s.
I feel like we
And
both had a similar journey with reading in our resurgence.
And then a friend turned me on to something called Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. It was like, you should read Brandon Sanderson. He's new, he's very popular. Well, not really new, but he's very popular in fantasy right now, and still is. But so I read Mistborn, and I'm gonna get hate for this. I thought Mistborn was super fine. There were parts of it that I really, really liked, but by the time I got to the third book in the original trilogy, I was kind of over it. Even though the third book is great, and I think I just reread it and gave it 5 stars. It's really good, and Mistborn is wonderful. People love it for a very good reason. But it just didn't. I don't know. It didn't hit. It didn't light me up as much as a lot of the series I had read when I was younger. And then I kind of was just like, well, I liked what he's reading, and it's easy to read, and I really like that aspect of it. So, like, does he have anything else? And I saw that he had these books called the Stormlight Archive. The first book was called The Way of Kings. And I didn't know anyone really who had read it, but I just picked it up, and I could not put it down. I had to implement, like, a rule for myself that I wasn't allowed to have anything to do for like the next 2 weeks anytime I picked up a Stormlight Archive book, because I would be staying up until 4 o'clock in the morning reading it, because I'd be like, just one more chapter.
Oh, I
just
love
one more chapter,
that, though.
just one more chapter.
That's the
Because I couldn't
best
put it
book.
down. I was absorbed in the world. I was living in Roshar, in the Cosmere, for that time. Like, the world disappeared to me. And it was like when you first start reading fantasy books as a kid, which I think is what a lot of millennials are chasing with
Yeah.
like a lot of us with the Harry Potter stuff.
Yeah.
Like, everyone is chasing that, a world that you just want to be in, a world that you like, that offers you an amazing escape where you're just like, I don't care about anything that's happening in the real world right now.
And I also feel like your access to power, like individual power, is similar, because I feel like a lot of millennials feel very powerless in today's world.
Yes, exactly. But yes, so I became obsessed with the Stormlight Archive, and I blew through, I don't remember how many books had come out at that. I think it was just the first 2 at that point. And the 5th book is coming out in December, and is my most anticipated release of the year for sure. Yeah, I mean, again, this is a pretty popular series, but if you don't know anything about the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, it is quite hard to explain, but it is the definition of epic fantasy. There are currently 4 books. The 5th book is planned to come out in December. Each one of them, I believe, easily cracks 1,000 pages. A massive, very fascinating magic system, multi-POV characters. We cover a ton of themes. Mental health is a specific focus in this series, specifically with a few characters dealing with things like depression and multiple personality disorder, and they're handled pretty deftly, I believe. Some of the most epic scenes I've ever read in any series ever. You can tell that Brandon Sanderson plans out all his books in advance. Otherwise, I don't know how you would come up with this many epic scenes per book. But it's so easy to get completely lost in the unbelievable world building that he does. And yeah, you know what? The books probably don't need to be as long as they are. They, especially the 4th one, I think could have been a bit shorter. But it's just a joy to get to visit that world. And it's Brandon Sanderson's kind of fantasy magnum opus in his shared universe, which is called the Cosmere. And I don't know that it's where I would recommend you start, but I think I would probably recommend starting with Mistborn.
Sure.
Even though I didn't give it the most glowing review, it is really good, and I will fully admit, like, on the outside with that, people love Mistborn. It is their favorite series of his, so I am an outlier here. I like doorstopper books that I can just completely lose myself in for days at a time. And so that's part of why I like Stormlight Archive so much. But yeah, it reignited anyway, all of that to say, the reason that it is so important to me is because it really reignited my love of fantasy as an adult and showed me that you can still have the same experience you had as a kid or as a young adult when you were so immersed in the world that you just forgot everything else when you are twice that age or even older. And those worlds and that type of writing are still out there waiting for you. And that's awesome. And it's really exciting. And there's no age limit on who can read fantasy and how it can affect you. And so, yeah, it's like that is you can do a direct trail from me reading the Stormlight Archive to us starting this channel. Because if I hadn't read the Stormlight Archive, I probably wouldn't have gotten back into reading as much as an adult. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah. What's number 3 for you?
Number 3 for me is the Harry Potter series.
Sure.
So it, for me, was the first time I'd ever read anything like that in a fantasy world. I got the book for, I believe, the first book, for my 10th birthday. So I was ready to get my letter by my 11th birthday. And I do specifically remember one day of like, I knew, I was like, Liz, you're a smart girl. Like, I know this is just a book. But I specifically remember one day there was like mail that came and I was like, could be there. And I remember looking at the front door and being like, this could be the day I find out I have magic. Yeah. It didn't come. But so
it didn't come and I'm still recovering.
I specifically remember I got that same birthday, I got the first Harry Potter book. I think I got the first 3 Harry Potter books, or the first 2 or 3. And then I got a Barbie with a blow-up chair. It's a great birthday.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, she was great.
Was the chair for her or for you?
It was for her. She was fierce.
Okay, got it.
She was phenomenal. It was a yellow chair. She had a yellow outfit. She had like a big fro. She was so cool.
Fascinating.
Oh, I loved her. Because I also had a blow-up chair in my room. So then she had her own little blow-up chair.
I'm with you.
Phenomenal birthday.
Great.
To say the least. Yeah, I don't even know how to like start to explain what the series like did for me as a young reader. I think it was similar to like you said about your like going to the school library and finding something and like being the only one who had it. Even though I knew it was very popular, in my head I was like, I don't think anybody understands how good this is. And like going about the world with the hopes that I would find magic. And to also grow with the series and to grow with the main characters, Harry, Hermione, and Ron, and have it for me was always good to have like a feeling of, yes, these are young characters doing insane things that they should not be doing. But as a young person, you absolutely think that you have the wherewithal. At least I did. I was like, I got this. To watch young characters be powerful and to make good choices, bad choices, get themselves out of them, go through a world. And obviously the magic, the world building was something that I had never experienced before. The fantasticalness of it very much pushed me into the fantasy realm as a young person. And I don't think I've ever left, to be honest. Yeah. But yeah, I was gonna say, I really don't know like how else to explain how important that was to me as a young reader. Yeah. And because, again, like I said, I think so much of it was, yes, being a young reader, but growing with the characters and waiting for the next book to come out and aging at the same time that they was, unreal. Really unreal. Yeah. Yeah.
A unique experience.
Yeah.
I'll go. Mine is also Harry. My third
one is also Harry
Potter.
Third,
I find it hard to talk about Harry
Potter
now. We're both millennials. Obviously, it kind of goes without saying that, and we're both millennials who read fantasy books. There is literally I doubt there's a single person in the world who likes reading fantasy as an adult that is our age that wasn't obsessed with Harry Potter. Yeah. It was a unique moment in society that will not be repeated again.
Absolutely.
It was some of my fondest memories are of like for waiting for the next book or waiting at midnight for the movie.
I remember how like
Borders.
How big! Oh my god, Borders! I remember getting so excited by like the 4th book, how big the books were. I was like, oh baby, it's gonna take me so long to read. It's gonna be so great.
Yeah, but it's I said earlier in the video that there are some books on this series I probably won't ever read again. I probably am not going to ever reread the Harry Potter books. One, because it's similar to like TV shows that maybe haven't aged super well. I don't want to go back and see the stuff that I missed when I was reading it when I was younger, because I'm sure it's there. And there's all the other stuff around the author. And it's so unfortunate that an author who wrote a series where one of the major themes is acceptance of those who are different from you does not follow her own preaching. There's not too much else to say. I mean, I wasn't going to include Harry Potter on this list, but I would be lying if it wasn't 100%. On there. Harry Potter has been there in some of the darkest times of my young adult life, and it wouldn't be true if I didn't talk about it on this list. It's unfortunate that things have shaken out the way that they have. I don't like I said, think I'm probably ever going to revisit these books. I'm not like going to go out recommending them to anyone either. There's a million other wonderful, wonderful middle grade and young adult series now. We were just at the library every time I go into a bookstore or a library, I'm like, oh my God.
Dude, I would have
look
lost,
at
as
look
like
at
a teen.
all of the things that all these teens have. And so
much.
Harry Potter was a moment in society. Yeah. I would recommend any young readers. There are so many other wonderful series out there for you. I would recommend those before that. It was a very specific time in the world, and it has created a generation of readers who are chasing that high of like living in another world for years and waiting for the release. And that's why romantasy and things like that are so popular, because it's a bunch of it's the Harry Potter generation chasing the feeling they had when they were reading Harry Potter.
And again, like they growing up in that adulthood. And I do think that romantasy and has grown with us in ways that obviously this series cannot, which is beautiful. And I think the thing that I love a lot about continuing to be a reader of allowing seeing us all grow and seeing us grow through that lens as well is really cool. You know, because like you said, it opened up an entire generation to magic. And I do think it created also an entire generation of very accepting and very loving people as well.
I don't know a single person in my real life who read and loved Harry Potter that agrees with any of the rhetoric J.K. Rowling has spewed in the past, I don't know, decade, however long it's been. So she may not be the best person, but she created a generation of people who are loving and accepting. And there's something to be said for that.
Separate the text from...
Yeah. Anyway, so Harry Potter, a little bit of a downer. That's probably the only time I'm ever going to talk about that series on this channel. But moving on to more cheerful things.
I don't know that mine's actually that cheerful, to be honest.
All right, let's do it.
For me, my number 2 is The Great Gatsby.
Oh, yeah.
It is my favorite book.
Where
are you going?
I'll be back.
Okay. Should I talk?
Yeah.
Okay. This was, I know I've talked about before and in this video as well of a lot of times I felt like I wasn't the smartest reader or smartest person, though I did get very good grades. Oh, thank you for this. And I also think I owe my love of this book, wow, I'm getting emotional, that's funny, I didn't think I would, to a particular teacher in high school. I was assigned this my senior year, and I remember walking into the class, and the teacher was different than any teacher I'd ever had. Very, in a way of very loud, very bold, very sarcastic, and made known their opinions about everything, politics, people, stereotypes, whatever. And I was very much stereotyped as the dumb cheerleader. And mind you, I was in an AP Lit class.
I thought you were about to say, mind you, I was a dumb cheerleader.
Well, to be fair, I was a dumb cheerleader.
She was totally right.
Correct. Though I had a 4.5 grade point average, whatever. Regardless, it's always been something that I've been decently self-conscious of. I do think that I'm a smart person, but I don't think I'm a smart person in the way that the world would say is smart. Like, as far as book smart and XYZ. I did get good grades, but I did it in my own way. Not really in the way that I was supposed to, if that made sense.
Sure. I have so many questions.
Great.
But yeah, sure.
We can dig into that another time. Anywho. Okay, so we were assigned The Great Gatsby. Knowing this teacher, thought I wasn't smart. And again, similarly, when we would have like open discussions in class, analytical discussions and things, specifically about a text that we read, regardless of it being like a literature class or whatnot, sure. I found myself always focused on things that people didn't and not being able to follow where they were going a lot of the times. If like people would be like, oh yeah, well this was really important. I was like, well, what about that part? Nobody's talking about that part. Did I just completely miss it? And for some reason I hyper-focused on that part. Mm-hmm. And I was vindicated in reading this book because I was so taken by Daisy Buchanan from the very beginning. And I think Daisy Buchanan gets a really bad rap. And I think that's the point. And I remember kind of bringing that up in class of, my favorite quote. She talks about how she hopes her daughter is a beautiful little fool. And I think it's such a metaphor for a young woman, and why I think Daisy Buchanan is such a strong character, because while she's manipulative, and many people would say I'm sure there are many awful things that people would say about this character. To me, I think she's strong and smart, because she figured out how to make her way in a world and get what she wanted as a woman in a world where she had no power and no say. So, do I think she's the greatest human ever? No. But I really respect the character, and it really kind of completely changed the way that I looked at the way a lot of women, real life women, have learned how to function in this world. And I remember bringing this up in this class, and I specifically remember the teacher went, like, full on. I was like, wow. Because no one else had brought up that point. And again, I was a little bit nervous, and I'm very proud of myself still to this day for speaking up whilst we had a book discussion, because no one was going to talk about Daisy in that way. Nobody was going to talk about this character, especially because you're in high school. You're in high school, you're not really thinking like this.
I read this in high school, and in fact, I think I read the Cliff's Notes, so definitely not.
Well, but I think because it's hidden in there, and it's not necessarily in your face how brilliant this character is, because she's kind of written as she plays the fool. That's literally her whole MO. So anywho, completely changed my life. Robbie got me this gorgeous copy for my birthday this year. I have started a new tradition of reading this every fall, because it takes place over summer leading into fall, and it's one of the first like classic literature books that I read that I was able to completely comprehend, and again analyze in a way that I felt like I understood what was happening, but I was also seeing things that maybe not everyone had seen. So I felt like it was a very validating read, and I still love it. I think the imagery, literally, there's a green light. The imagery in it is stunning. Having now lived in New York, I think it hits even different, even better. There's my Daisy girl. Or is that supposed to be Myrtle? No, probably Daisy.
I think that's Daisy.
But yeah, this book honestly completely changed my life. It changed.
Spoiler. Not going to do that one.
Big spoiler. This book changed how I looked at myself as far as my intelligence, and it changed the way that I thought about powerful female characters. And I think it opened my mind a lot to look at things in general, not just on the page, but in real life, in a way in which I don't know that other people would necessarily look, because you're reading between the lines, you're looking at the history, you're seeing the past, you're thinking about what people have gone through that has made them act the way that they do. And so this changed my life in a lot of ways. And it's probably maybe my number one favorite book, but my number two. It's at my number two spot, but anywho, Great Gatsby.
Great Gatsby. And that special edition was from Lit Joy Crate. Yes. Anyway, I believe they just have it for sale, so if you like Great Gatsby.
Yeah, and it's got sprayed edges.
It's pretty.
I am excited
I think it's gilded edges,
that this... Oh, gilded edges, I'm so sorry. This will be the first year I will be doing my reread with this fanciful copy.
Fanciful copy.
It is fanciful.
Very nice.
Okay, Robbie, go.
Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about is Lord of the Rings. Really just Middle-earth in general. I mean, as a kid, it was mostly The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings.
Yes,
I've read the Silmarillion now as an adult, but definitely not as a kid.
You're so powerful. I tried as like an 11-year-old because I remember...
I did once, too.
I've read The Hobbit, which I loved, and I've read the first two Lord of the Rings, and I've never read Return of the King.
Shame.
But I love Lord of the Rings.
I didn't read
world.
The appendices until I was older.
I don't think I've read the appendices.
You definitely, if you haven't read Lord of the Rings.
But I specifically, in my Lord of the
Return
Rings era, because I was very much a Lord of the Rings fan, specifically when the movies came out, I was absolutely obsessed. I was like, I'm going to read the Silmarillion. And I specifically remember reading maybe a half a page and was like, I'm absolutely not going to read the Silmarillion.
Silmarillion is tough.
I think I'll get in
Very
there eventually. I would like to get in there.
Not modern
dense.
In any way. It is very dense.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
Anyway,
Lord of the Rings.
I owe a lot of my love of fantasy to my father. He would read us bedtime stories when we were getting in bed or eating. Nice catch. Do you want me to take that and put that there? Okay. My father would read us bedtime stories when we were either eating dessert or getting into bed, and a favorite was The Hobbit. That is the first one I remember him reading us. I'm sure there were others. But he read us The Hobbit, and I insisted he continue reading us The Hobbit all the time, even if we had just finished it. And he did a creepy voice for Smeagol, Gollum, that scared me. And I was like, no, Dad, don't do it. But I loved it. It was great. yes, I mean, he read Harry Potter to us. I think he read the entirety of The Lord of the Rings to my little brother. He definitely did not do that with us. That would be kind of dense and tough to do. But Chronicles of Narnia, a lot of the classics.
The classics. Classic
And
fantasy, really.
classic younger child fantasy. And yes, so my father read that to us. And then when I started reading myself, I was basically like, okay, so there's The Hobbit. That's it. And then there's this series my dad talked about called The Lord of the Rings that like continues that. Those are really the only, like, I don't, what is fantasy? I don't know. I'm a kid. So I read The Hobbit like, I don't know, between 6 and 10 times in elementary school because I was just like, well, I love The Hobbit.
I love The Hobbit. This
so
is
let's
the world.
read The Hobbit. And it is. I mean, there's a reason it's been so long lasting. It is there's a feeling I get when I read Tolkien and especially when I finish the series, a sense of like accomplishment that probably harkens all the way back to when I was reading these books as like a 8-year-old. But I don't get that from anything else because it's such if the world feels so real and lived in, and
that's what you get when you spend a whole page,
talking about
one specific thing.
Yes. But yes, and I know that there are people who really only like Lord of the Rings, or they're like, I saw a Colbert interview where he was like, I don't even read The Hobbit, and I'm like, oh, that's crazy to me.
Hobbit's
but okay,
phenomenal.
I mean, everyone has their own
Rings.
tastes, and that's great. But and then of course the Lord of the Rings movies came out, which are nothing like the books, but made them extremely popular.
But the world is phenomenal.
The world is phenomenal,
So pretty.
and then that led me to doing my first, I believe I started the Fellowship of the Ring for the first time in the 4th grade, which I was just like chugging through. I probably missed half the words because I didn't have a thesaurus. And like, I think it took me 3 years to read the 3 books, but I did it and I felt extremely accomplished and I felt so mature and adult.
You were.
And I mean, I think The Lord of the Rings is, the first for so many people, and 100%. It was for me too. It was the whole. I probably didn't even know the word fantasy or really understand it as a genre of literature, but it didn't matter. Like that was Lord of the Rings, and so that captured my imagination. Specifically, like I said, The Hobbit, because it is written for younger readers, so a lot less dense and much easier to just like blow through. And when you're a kid, seeing a book that's like this thick and being able to just read through it and understand everything that's happening and be so immersed in this world of dragons and dwarves and elves is exciting. I mean, obviously I still love Lord of the Rings to this day, but it is on this list for me because it was the first. Like The Hobbit, I don't have a memory of when The Hobbit was first read to me. I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't know what a Hobbit was. And that says a lot. Like, I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't know that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father.
I was about to say, that's me.
It's
me with Star Wars. I don't remember
like
not
that
knowing Star Wars.
level of, like, core that's just a part of my life. And it's thanks to my father, and it's...
Yeah.
So, a lot of nostalgic, cherished childhood memories of eating ice cream and listening to my dad do his best Gollum, riddles in the dark.
I need to get him to bust that out.
I can't do it, so he's great. And yeah, it's just, you never forget your first, do you?
No.
And, you knew Lord of the Rings was going to be somewhere on this list. It kind of always has to be.
Yeah.
I don't feel any need to tell people what The Lord of the Rings is about.
Oh my God, imagine.
If you don't know what it's about,
that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally cool if you don't.
And
you
also,
absolutely should go watch the
potentially
movies
start
or
with the
something.
movies.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely start with the movies. It's a much easier.
Because I had read The Hobbit as a young. I think I was in the 3rd or 4th grade when I first read that. Because I had a similar. I remember finding it in the school library and being like, "This looks cool."
What's this?
I think it might have had like. It was one of those cool ones with the cool old drawings on the front.
Yes, sure.
And I read that, but obviously. Then The Lord of the Rings came out, and that changed my whole life.
Yes, it did. All right, so what's your last one?
My final, it's ACOTAR.
Sure, I should have guessed.
I mean, it was going to be on this list eventually at some point, but I think specifically in my adulthood, this honestly changed my life. It brought me back into the world of reading. It also, this series was so healing for me in so many ways. So many ways.
ACOTAR stands for A Court of Thorns and Roses, in case there's anyone here who just doesn't know what that acronym means.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You're so right. A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. It got me back into reading. I picked it up early 2020.
Had you read Sarah J. Maas before that?
Nope.
Okay.
I had seen one person that I had followed on Instagram post about how she couldn't put it down, and this was not bookish. I also feel like book talk bookstagram didn't really become a thing until 2020.
Yeah, sure.
And I remember her saying that, and she was someone that I followed for a long time, and I'm like, we kind of like the same things. I should probably pick this up because I was feeling the desire to read again, because I'd read here and there the occasional Nora Roberts trilogy, but wasn't a regular part of my life. I very much lived a long span of my young adult life thinking that if I'm reading, it should be like a self-development book. I should be reading to better myself rather than reading to escape, which is, it's so funny because I specifically remember being a young, like probably preteen, and thinking like, oh my gosh, if I ever stop reading in my life, I'm gonna be so sad. Because it was like, I was constantly my nose in a book. The library summer reading challenge was
I gotta love those.
Oh, my life. And having the same feelings that I do now as a full adult, grown adult, as I did when I was a young person, thinking like, this is the greatest feeling ever. This escape is so important to me. I'm getting to know myself so well through reading these other people's journeys. And that's really how I felt with ACOTAR. Mainly, it was so fun to allow myself to escape into a fantasy world again, because that's somewhere I've always felt at home. And not something that was always necessarily like accepted around me socially as a young person. And so it was really nice to come back as an adult and just have the choice to be made that I love fantasy worlds, and I think about fantasy worlds all the time. And there was also romance and sex and phenomenal storytelling, world building, and so much mental health is brought up in these series. And in the first trilogy, I really felt myself healing through Feyre's journey, and then eventually through Nesta's as well. And I think that for me as an adult has been probably the most important mental health tool I have. As silly as that may sound, I think escaping into a fantasy world, and specifically I think a lot of writers, and I read a lot of female adult writers, are really delving into kind of the healing that we all need at this age, as a millennial specifically, a lot of them, but it changed my life. I love the series. I am so grateful for it. It reinvigorated my love of reading and has allowed me to step into myself more fully as an adult, because it is such an integral part of me. Fantasy and make-believe and magic. And sex. Is sex. It's less about the sex and more about just like embracing who I am, what I like, and without giving a care in the world what other people think. Still working on that part. But, this series in particular really has helped me accept and love every bit of myself. And I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your last one?
So my last one is a series I imagine a lot of people on here will have never heard of. It had a very specific time where it was, I guess, vaguely popular. It is for like young readers and maybe middle grade. And the author unfortunately passed away, I think, over a decade ago now. But it is the Redwall series by Brian Jakes. And I just found out that that's how you're supposed to pronounce his last name. I've pronounced it Jacques my whole life, but it's Jakes, apparently. This is one of my most prized possessions. It's my very old copy of the original Redwall book. The cover is kind of almost falling off.
It's like yellow. It's good.
Yeah, it's very yellow. It's got that good book smell.
Super old book smell. That's a good book.
Yeah. There's a lot of context so I'll give about why this is so important to me. So I'll give a little bit of it. But I wasn't a great reader growing up. I had to go to like supplementary reading lessons. They called it reading lab when I was in, I think, second or third grade.
Yeah.
And I don't, I'm not dyslexic or anything like that. To my knowledge, it wasn't any learning disability. I don't think I was super interested in reading. Eventually they had me stop going to reading lab because they're like, well, you can read, so there's
you
that.
can do the stuff.
But it was never something that particularly interested me. But I remember the day I was in fourth grade in Mrs. Eckert's class, and we went down to the library in our elementary school, and she pulled a book off the shelf, and it wasn't this one, but it was a library copy of this. She said, I think you should read this. I think you might like it. And that changed my life. I had, at that point, basically read The Hobbit. that was really like I was like, The Hobbit is good, and I like The Hobbit.
Period. Nothing
and that's
else.
really, and I'm not really interested in anything else but like Calvin and Hobbes and comic books and stuff at the time. And this changed that for me in a very, very major way. I went from not really reading unless I was forced to do so to not being able to get my head out of a book. And it like changed who I was as a person on a pretty fundamental level.
Yeah.
And I spoke earlier about how this Dark Materials trilogy opened the world to me, as in like I can find things for myself that, you know, that expand my horizons in literature and fantasy. And this was that on a smaller scale, but in a more important way, because it showed me that there is something other than Lord of the Rings that I will like. And there are like 20 of them. And there's just more stories. If you don't know anything about Redwall, it is this book is pretty big for and this is one of the shortest ones, I think, for a book series that is targeted at elementary schoolers. I don't even think it's technically middle.
Pretty big, yeah.
It's not at like middle grade readers, and it follows anthropomorphic woodland animals like mice and voles and moles and things like that, and I know, it smells great,
like
right?
a library.
Their adventures largely circulating around a place called Redwall Abbey. It's very funny reading. I haven't read them in a very long time, and I'm a little bit nervous too, because I don't want to go back, because they're so special to me, and I don't want to go back and be like, oh, this isn't as good as I remember. Though, I mean, how can anything be? But one day I will go back and start reading these. I've been toying with the idea of reading some of them and talking about them a little bit on the channel versus like what I remember versus what it actually is, and how it, how the nostalgia plays with all of that. I own like half of these books, and
Hold it.
I do. Okay. And this just represents a turning point in my life, and something that is like a cornerstone of who I am as a person. And it's funny reading books now that I'm older, like specifically like Game of Thrones. Like Game of Thrones is one of the only things I can think, like there are delicious feasts in these books. That's one of like the main things. There's incredible, like Tolkien has incredible descriptions of the landscape. Brian Jakes has ridiculous descriptions of like the food for the woodland creatures. So it's all like candied nuts and different cheeses. And the only thing that I could think of to compare it to is like Game of Thrones, where George R. R. Martin spends 5 pages describing the food at a feast. And it's hilarious reading that as an adult and being like, I am having a like flashback moment, a deja vu moment of thinking about this while reading Game of Thrones. And I don't know which one came first, probably Game of Thrones, but it's still, you can see all of the tropes in here. And I'm sure if I read it now, it would seem very cutesy and, I would identify all of the tropes, but at the time, it was the first time I was reading a lot of them. And that was such a magical experience. And it's not just all like fun, easy stuff. I mean, it is pretty black and white usually with like who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. But there's death and loss and painful moments. And yeah, I really can't say enough about how special these books are to me. I don't know if I can recommend them to anyone who would watch this channel. If you have kids, I cannot recommend these enough. If you want your kids to read, I couldn't put these down. It's a fascinating and beautiful world, and so vibrant with life and positivity. But I don't know if anyone as an adult would get too much out of them unless you've read them when you were a kid. If you did read these when you were a kid, I hope you take this as a sign to try and pick one up again, because I think I might do that sometime next year. Yeah. But hard to overstate how much this series means to me. It is the reason that I read, essentially. So, yeah. But that's almost like an hour of us
just talking about books we love.
Talking about books that we love. So I hope you learned a little bit more about us and our history. It was kind of nice to talk about books without being like, I think this was good or bad. Yeah. It's just like, I love this book and here's why.
And period.
But yeah, do you have, we'd love to hear about your favorite books down in the comments below. Let us know. And this is also kind of a weird video because there's everyone has like a ranking their favorite. And this is kind of more of just like, this is the most important to me as a reader. One day we absolutely need to do a top 10 fantasy series thing. I know it's
But
gonna be
okay,
tough,
we
but
can
we're
do
gonna
it.
we're
We'll
gonna
do
do
it.
it.
We'll do it.
But what are your, I mean, favorite fantasy series, of course, as well, but like the most formative fantasy
Yeah, the
series
books
to you, the
that
things
changed you.
that changed you, that are the most important to who you are as a person or as a reader, or both.
Yeah,
I find that it's pretty hard to differentiate the two. To be
No,
honest.
honestly, same. Like
But-
I can make two separate paths, but they very often coincide into me as a reader and me as a human.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. If you've stuck with us to the end here, thank you for listening to us ramble on about ourselves and our lives.
Happy to have been making videos for a whole year.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for sticking with us for a year or for however long you've been with us. We're still having a blast. And I think we're just going to keep chugging along.
This is also the month of our wedding anniversary as well.
Yes, our wedding anniversary
is a great month
very
for us.
soon. Yeah, so it's a great month for us. And
In the world.
And the
October's
world.
just great.
October's just great. One of my favorite months,
Actually,
for sure.
isn't that... No, never mind. There's a quote in Gatsby about the fall, and I was like, is that the book where the October's quote comes from? Could be. Anywho.
I don't know. Anyway, like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and
we'll see you on our next adventure.